On Feb 16th, Marvel's highly anticipated next installment in the Marvel Universe of movies, The Black Panther, debuted in theaters. Now, I don't need to explain what this movie is about because of all the hype, but one thing for sure, it quickly became the fastest and highest grossing Marvel movie of all time. 1 week later, it has earned over $700 million at the box office worldwide. But why is it so big? I mean, is it just a movie? And why is a fictitious character from a fantasy country in the heart of the African continent having such a significant impact on the social narrative today? Joining me again is my co-host from the Men and Marriage series on the Man Cave last year, Pastor Denley McIntosh. As always, for those watching this broadcast live on YouTube, feel free to add your comments in the comment bar. Joining me again is Denley McIntosh, and of course, you, our viewers. I'm Sean Best. Denley, welcome back.
Hey, Sean, thanks for having me back. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, I know I've been looking forward to this since I saw the show on opening night. Wanted to have this last week, but certain things came up and I had to push it off week, so my apologies for that. But it gave me the opportunity to give the good news that it's earned $700 million worldwide, so that's good news to give. So, Denley, let's just get into it. So you saw the movie.
Yes.
Give me your initial thoughts. Now, you saw it more than once, right?
Yeah, I saw it twice. It was a date night with my wife, and then I took the children afterward.
Okay, so what was your initial thought, or your initial when you walked out of the theater? What was your initial thought about the movie?
That was a homecoming. For me, it was like a homecoming. It was, I study Afro-Caribbean history, dabble a little African history, but just by extension of obviously the slave trade. Study enough about world history, and so everything from an academic standpoint. The whole process of what happened to us many hundreds of years ago. But this was a little different, and even though it was fantasy, I call it historical fiction. And historical fiction is something that it is made up, but it is still historically based in the sense that it could have happened in the times past. And so when I saw it in terms of that context, I had it was like a renaissance for me, really much of a homegoing. It's like, this is what could have been or should have been.
Now, what did you find? I mean, I agree with you on that point. And, I've read a few articles. I'm sure you've seen a few YouTube clips, read a few articles about it, but they tried to do a mix or melange of different costumes or outfits from different tribes across the continent. They had different visual references. I know the accent was probably going to be very hard to place because a lot of the actors were either British or American, so they were just doing their best to mimic an African accent or a South African accent. But I know it was a big mix. But was there anything that you could think of that was very striking? That sort of, when you think about what you saw and what you heard, what struck you the most?
I think it was M'Baku's scene where you had this almost Arctic tribe. I didn't really give thought about an Arctic tribe among our people, but I suppose it makes sense if you think about the mountains in any country. The higher up you go, no matter how warm a climate is, it will get colder. So they get to think about having. I guess the closest thing for us would be like the Inuits over here. Our people having been living up north and wearing fur, so to speak. I thought that was really striking. So it gave me pause to think about other aspects of our background.
One of the things that struck me was they found a really good way to balance having the military, the military being primarily or almost all female, but done in such a way where you actually saw them as true military. They seemed dangerous, they seemed well trained. The thing that struck me personally the most was, and they didn't need to dumb down the guys to make the women who were his primary military force appear to be powerful and strong and intelligent. So that's something I think that is a bit of a a departure from what you typically see now, because in order for one to look good, you have to make the other one look like a bunch of buffoons running around.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I think they did a great job there, which gave balance. So the girls who were looking for people they can relate to on the screen saw people they can relate to on the screen. The one thing I did notice, and in fact, well, I take it back. I did not notice until I saw a comment, I think it was yesterday. Someone said, okay, so we saw there was King T'Challa, there was Forrest Whitaker's character, there was M'Baku that you mentioned, and a few other characters. Where were all the other men? There weren't very many.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, if you look at I'm trying to think of like the add-on characters, the more in the background, but
I mean,
in terms of protagonists,
on the wall on the cliff, like you saw them up there, but it didn't dawn until this person made this point. I was thinking, yeah, you're right. I don't, except for the main characters, those who had speaking parts, I don't remember seeing very many others.
Yeah, the protagonists were a few Angela, obviously Bassett playing the mother's scene. Yes, I meant Zuri. Shuri, I think his sister. I'm just kind of going through. I'm actually on the side. I remember counting my side notes here. It looks like a pretty good balance, because if I'm counting 1, 2, 3, probably there's like a good split. So you're right. I mean, the male characters didn't dominate. I think in terms of numbers, in terms of roles. There seems to be a pretty good balance. That was the thing that really struck me as well, as much as the looking at M'Baku's scene, but there also the gender balance. I said, if there's a true thing called feminism, then this would be it, in terms of, as you said, not bashing men, but giving women their proper dues. There was definitely a reverence for both sides of the gender aisle.
Yeah, it definitely was. So what is it about the movie that you think appeals to so many people's imaginations? Because I think, if you were to ask me, I think that's the crux of what really attracted a lot of people to it, because some people saw it from, historical perspective, like yourself. You saw a lot of references to history. I saw a bit of that myself. Some people saw it from excuse me, the Marvel characters perspective, because there's the Marvel universe, and I was a big Marvel character. Don't mind the fact that I'm wearing Batman. I know this is DC, but I was a big Marvel guy growing up. So some people saw it from that perspective. Some people knew nothing or very little about the other two, but went anyways. So if you had to take a stab at it, what do you think was about the movie that struck people's imaginations to the point where people were just giddy? They couldn't wait to go see it.
Yeah, I would say for our community, it was something of, we didn't really have superheroes. I know there was Blade, I know it was Hancock, but I mean, I think it was we didn't have social media. Maybe Blade would have been different. We had social media. Maybe Hancock would have been different. At least with Hancock was Hancock, I don't think it would have been so much of a celebratory hero, because he was a buffoon. He was a hero, but he's a buffoon. So he was a real hero in that regard, an everyday hero that makes mistakes. But we wanted something a little more transcendent, a little more surreal. So I don't know if he would have got as much traction. Blade, possibly, but it didn't transcend the North American, that's sort of westernized setup. So this had a combination of the social media. You had something that transcended. I think we were longing for something different. I actually just wanted to see the movie because I didn't say, oh, Black Panther. Saw it, obviously, Civil War. So I was looking forward to see what they're going to do. But I got more than I expected. So what I'm telling you is not what I actually went to go and see. It's just like, oh my goodness, where are we going this? And I started to put on my intellectual cap here, because there was a lot more that had to be unpacked.
It's funny because I was very excited about seeing it, and I was excited from the moment that they announced it last summer. And when I got there and I walked out, I remember thinking to myself, the first thing I was thinking was, I don't know what my first reaction is, and because I don't know what I was expecting. I remember thinking it wasn't what I expected, but I don't know what I was expecting. So
Yeah.
typically when I walk out of a movie, I've got a pretty good handle on it. I mean, one thing I have to say that Marvel did a great job on was, and they always seem to do a great job on this, is, and I'm a stickler for character development. I don't like just
Mhm.
rushing through a movie, lots of special effects, flashbang, end of story, the credits roll, and you think, oh, that was a great movie. Well, I'm not impressed by flashbang special effects. Everyone can do that nowadays. It's really cheap to do it. It's really about the character development, the depth of the story, and the breadth of the background of the story. And Marvel yet again did a great job because they're going to lead down to, I think it's called the Infinity War, and the Infinity War is going to build on what we now know about his background and his history and so on. But the one thing I found was very interesting, and I can't think of another movie where I can say it was pointed out as clearly as it was in this movie, and that is, although the cast was primarily of African descent, you had the African cast, and you had, or the African characters, because all the cast, the majority of them were American, but you had the African characters, and then you had the American characters, and you had the friction that exists between the two. Because oftentimes when you see reference to the black community, whether they're African or American, or North American or Caribbean, there's very little emphasis on the distinct friction sometimes that exists between our African family and everyone else in the diaspora. But they made a very distinct point about that conflict, or that I don't want to call it conflict, but more of that friction. What were your thoughts about that? Did you notice that?
Yeah, I think Eric Killmonger really epitomized that, the tension, uh, this sort of brewing or very, very latent dissension. Maybe, especially for my parents' generation beyond, there's a sense that we've been betrayed, we've been abandoned. And when I talk to some of my Nigerian friends or Ghanaian, there's not a sense that we're their lost brothers or sisters. Um, so you do have that. So when the Western African cadre, and they come over here, they're my analysis of this, and I kind of played around with this with my friend, a Nigerian friend, because they see themselves as Nigerian first. They're very much Nigerian or Ghanaian. Like that's so being black is really secondary. It's not primary. But when you come to North America, and you're in the belly of the Western civilization. Black seems to supersede the everyday lived experience. And so telling a Nigerian that you're black like me, it's like, what do you mean? I'm different from you. But no, we are black today. I remember a joke was talked about a passenger's son, and they're on the airplane, and they talked about the plane was going down, and the pilot said, we have to, in order for us to survive, we have to throw people off the airplane, and so they're going to go in alphabetical order by ethnicity. So they began with A, and so the son looked at the father. So, Dad, it's over. He said, because we're Afro Americans, they're going to throw us off. He said, no, son, we're okay. And then father said B, and he said, Dad, that's it. Why, son? Because we're black. They're going to throw us over. And then the father said, "No, it's okay." And they finally got to C, and the son was like, "Whoa, Dad, you're a pastor. We're not A, we're not B. What's going on?" He said, "Today we're C, son. We're colored people." And so the whole point is that the identification of a particular naming convention is more very palpable when you come here, that you are black. You're no longer Jamaican or Haitian or whatever. You're black, and so there are some things that has to be unpacked and has to be accepted within this culture. And many of my Nigerian friends, at least in Canada, I can't speak in the U.S. What I do know, I heard in the U.S., maybe parts of maybe New York, maybe those people who are listening can validate this, but there is some kind of intertension between Caribbeans, Afro Americans, and continental Africans. So those are things that we should actually really have some kind of conversation, dialogue, and pretend that that doesn't exist. I know Afro Americans sometimes are very wary of Caribbeans and Jamaicans. My background's Jamaican. So I love it because it brought us all together. Now it's like, okay, let's all have the conversation because we now know we are more related, more alike than different.
And I think the one of the things about the movie, in spite of the fact it's all fiction, was that it was something that attracted all of our imagination, because although there were American characters, there were African characters, many of the actors were from the Caribbean, Guyana. There was a Trinidadian, I think Mbaka was from Trinidad. There's a couple of others. I can't recall which other islands there were. I think Jamaica as well. Wasn't there a couple of Jamaican actors in the movie?
I don't remember seeing Jamaica. I know there was Guyana, Trinidad. I think maybe Bahamas.
Okay.
So I think those are the three. I don't remember Jamaica, at least with the main characters, that is.
Okay.
Yeah, but island support. For those people who say Guyana's in South America, historically they're part of the West Indian. So,
right,
so even though they're South America, they're historically West Indian. So if people say, "Hey, they're not," it's not an island.
I have a friend of mine who's Ghanaian, who not Ghanaian, he's from Guyana, but he grew up in England. And he takes exception to the term West Indian because that was a term that came from Christopher Columbus when he got lost. He says the Caribs were there before before it was considered the Western Indies. But we're used to saying West Indian, so he and I always play back and forth with that. But yeah, I found that was interesting. It got my attention. That what we're just talking about in terms of that tension between continental Africans and essentially everybody else. And I think the distinction between the two, for anybody who figures out they're all black people, is that I think what we outside of continental Africa identify with commonly, and how we identify with each other, regardless of whether my parents are from Barbados, yours are from Jamaica. I have family from Trinidad. There's Americans from the South, Americans from the Northeast. Is that how our experience living in the Western world is a common lived experience. Nobody knows looking at you that, they're going to treat you differently because you're from Jamaica and treat me differently because my parents are from Barbados. As far as they're concerned, we both have a certain skin color and we get the treatment we're going to get. And that common lived experience is how we relate to each other. Africans, on the other hand, from one country to the next, may have some similarities, but their common lived experience is relative to the borders of their country, right? So Nigerians have a very distinct culture, and probably even within Nigeria have distinct communities that have very different cultures from other communities within the country. So just because one person may be Nigerian and one may be Ghanaian, yeah, they're both from the same African continent, but they're from completely different countries, completely different cultures. So I don't know that. I mean, I may be speaking out of turn. So anybody who sees this and thinks this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, put a comment in the comment bar. I'll take a look at it. But I don't know that they necessarily have the same common lived experiences that you and I and other people in the Western world can relate to. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say maybe for the most part, with the exception of South Africa. I think when I'm reading through Mandela's autobiography, he was struck on the parallels with the challenges that blacks in the U.S. had with South Africa's apartheid was probably the equivalent. Their challenge, obviously, were in Canada, you had different Caribbeans, which would represent tribes in South Africa, because South Africa, you had all the different tribes, and I can't pronounce all the names, and so I won't even try. And so you had that you had the tribal sort of disagreement, and that's also in parallel to the ruling class versus them as being the oppressed class. So I think that's probably the parallel. I can't speak for other African countries, but I would say that maybe would be similar to our experience.
Yeah, it just created a lot of thought for me after watching the movie, in spite of the fact that it was all fiction. So here's another thing I was thinking about. So, and I want your thoughts on this. Given Hollywood's very weak track record of making movies with mostly black casts, and the performance of most of those movies at the box office. Do you think this was a huge risk for Marvel and Disney? Like, why would they take such a risk? And what do you think they saw in this project that they thought would be a good investment?
Yeah, that's a good question. Was it a big risk for them? I don't know if it was a big risk for them.
Because I think from our perspective, when
Hmm.
we saw it, we knew right away that was going to be a hit. We knew it right away, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That's why it attracted so much attention. But Hollywood has historically made bad decisions when it comes to those kinds of movies, and usually the roles that when it's an all black cast,
hmm,
it's either The Help, it's The Butler, it's 12 Years a Slave, it's it's something like that, right? Or
Didn't
it's
they all
Training Day.
didn't they all get awards at the Oscar or something?
They did get awards, but the thing is, the
Yeah.
characters were always cast in the stereotypical roles. They were either
Mhm.
subservient, they were dangerous, they were former sharecroppers, sons of
Yeah.
sharecroppers. It's always the same story over and over until 12 Years a Slave and running. The dogs are chasing me. Played out. This movie had nothing of the sort in it, and so I'm just wondering who came up with the concept and thought, how did they pitch this to get people in Hollywood to say, "Yeah, I'll put money behind this"?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Ryan Coogler, the director. He's 31 years old. I mean, young, sir, I don't want to say up and coming director. I'm sure he's probably done his thing. We're just now hearing some of the beauty of his artwork.
I think it's safe
Uh,
to say this is his biggest piece of artwork right now.
yeah, yeah, and then which is going to be going down as a memento for our community, and I think this generation, this culture. I think because being young I think you take more risk. Just inherently you do, and then you want to push the envelope. So I think that piece would allowed him to do what he needed to present Marvel with a. I don't know if you want to call it so edgy, but it's different where you really want to dive in more. Stan Lee, Stan Lee was a guy that he was cutting edge in his time in terms of making comics. So it may be just that stance. I've been waiting for this. I needed someone to take a chance, and it's almost like he couldn't do it. He needed someone who would take that mantle or give him permission to let that work. And of course, you have Disney. We know Disney is on the bandwagon with inclusion, diversity. Blackish is one of their bigger shows, so they're not going to really stomp that out, knowing how much Blackish is driving a lot of their that and a few other shows, but that's one of their premier shows. So I just think that you had this confluence of Disney being in the know now, accepting that. You had Stanley who says, "Yeah, I've written stuff like this in the '70s," and then you have Ryan being a director, being young, and want to do something that's different. It all just kind of worked together in symphony.
You been sort of the perfect storm. All these
Yeah,
storms collided, and the Black Panther was born.
yeah,
So one other topic up. I saw a book, and it was talking about. I think we're getting some latency here. Hold on. Are you getting where it's starting to stagger a bit, the video?
yeah. I'm just trying to look at
I'm going
on.
to try to
Oh,
shut down a few things here. Just give me a moment.
likewise.
I'm sure I'm trying to keep this really skinny. My apologies. I'm trying to get this the Wi-Fi situation sorted out here. Okay, still really. Let me turn my phone off. I'm turning everything off here just to make certain we can get to. Oh, that looks like whatever you and I both did, it seems to have worked. So, guys, my apologies. I'll put my phone on airplane mode. Maybe that'll help a little bit. All right, that seems to be working. Okay, so one other thing. So there was a thread going back and forth. And I'm sure our viewers, anybody who's watching this now and who are watching later on, And if you guys want to comment on it, please do. I'm looking at the comments here now. I saw comments from some people saying, well, so what? They're making all this money. Why don't they donate some of this money back to the black community? Now, that always sounds like the right answer. It always sounds like the right thing. Everyone goes, yeah, that's what we should do. Donate money to help some cause. And I took a different perspective on that. I want to hear what your perspective on that is, and I'll share what my perspective is on that.
Yeah, my wife said something very, very insightful that do you not think by supporting the movie that it didn't contribute to the black community? Because the clothing and probably a lot of the makeup artists, uh, the cast, these are all black actors. So you essentially were giving to the black community because now you, to, for the life of their career, they'll be associated with Black Panther, and now that's going to open up a fair bit of doors for many of the ensemble cast and the support team to do other work. So that's going to be forever on the resume. So we have, in that sense, and I totally agree with her, we were or are supporting the black community. Can the money go beyond that? Sure, it can, but I think to say that we weren't supporting the black community is belittling the roles, the work of these bright men and women that were actually hard at work producing this masterpiece.
You know, I hadn't heard that, but you're absolutely right. And I think you have to think about. I think there's a tendency sometimes to think of these things with a very short-term perspective, right? What can you do for me right now? It's always the right now mentality. And when you think about it, you know, we've heard people complaining, and we've complained ourselves about the fact that there aren't any good movies that portray us in a positive light. It's always, you know, like the examples I gave earlier. This was one where there have been movies like that where they've tried to portray, you know, people of our color in a positive light, and those movies have bombed historically. They were never promoted properly. They were badly directed. Various reasons why they bombed. This was the one example where it just completely blew up. So to your point, yeah, it says. I think what people forget is that Hollywood isn't about. Their first concern isn't about making you or me or anybody else feel good, right? Movies are investments. Someone says, "Yep, I'm going to invest $50 million in this movie." Now, if you're going to invest $50 million of your own money into something, you want to know you're going to get something back for that money. I don't care if you're black, white, green, or from Mars. If you're investing money, you want to get money back. That's what Hollywood's all about, right? That's what entertainment's about. Investing money to make a return on your dollar. Whoever invested in Black Panther is sitting there rubbing their hands together because they're making money, right? So what they're thinking of is, okay, well, we found this formula now that we didn't find before. This is a new formula. How can we reuse this formula to make more money? So that may sound bad, but in the end, we're very likely going to have another Black Panther-like movie, whether it's the actual Black Panther or something entirely different, where they use that formula to draw that same audience back in so they can get the return on investment, and we get the content that we want to see that we've been asking for. So in a sense, that is the investment. To your point, there are a lot of black costume makers, makeup artists, actors, extras, probably CG artists, the director, so on. They now, like you said, have this on their resume. Their resume goes out there. They make other movies. They may bring the influence that they were able to have on Black Panther to other movies and grow that influence outwards. My perspective on this was we have to stop looking at these things like, what can you now give me? And the example I use is this. You can give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. You know how the saying goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you teach him how to fish, he feeds his village for life, right? So the reason I use that example is, okay, you donate $1 million to the Boys and Girls Club, which is what I heard that they did. Okay, that's great. That's fantastic. When that money runs out, then what? you're back to square one. You're looking for another donation, right? It doesn't make a long term. It makes a short term spike, a big difference. We got new uniforms this week, and we got to take the kids to the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington D.C. In a year and a half time, the money's gone. Then what? Where's the next set of money going to come from? There's not going to be Black Panther every year, right? So what I was saying was this: we saw an example of what happens when you use our collective buying power. Now, it's been said that the collective U.S. buying power of African Americans in the U.S. alone, so I'm sure if you include Canada, this is even exponentially larger, is $1.2 trillion. It's the equivalent of the 9th largest economy on Earth. Our buying power. We've never used our buying power to exert our will and to show people that we are worth catering to because we have a lot of money, right? This movie, I think, was almost like, to your point, that perfect storm, that example where we all came together to watch the movie for various reasons. Some people just thought it was great. Some people are big Marvel fans. Some people are like, what's all the hype about it? I think I'll just go see it. Regardless of what brought us all together, we made this into a $700 million masterpiece, right? What we learned was the power of our spending power, what influence it has. If we were to use that knowledge to say, okay, well, what else could we narrowly focus like a laser our spending power on to make change happen overnight? And you know what the stock market is like. If we decided, okay, this week we're going to invest in Marvel and Disney stock, and we invest $700 million in their stock, I guarantee you, by tomorrow's report, when the CEO sits down, he sees that stock price has gone up $700 million, he's going to find a way to make sure he's catering to our community tomorrow. It's going to happen that quick. If we decide that, well, they're taking our money and they're not using it the way we like them to use it, we pull our money, we divest that $700 million. I guarantee you that very next day, the CFO gives him the report, he takes a look at it, holy crap, our stock just fell of 1% or whatever. He's going to come back looking to us and asking us for our support. That's real power. And that's how we leverage our dollar to make things happen into the future. Not just, hey, can we have $1 million for the Boys and Girls Club? That's great. That's fantastic. When we blow out that money, then what? Right? We're back to square one. I think we learned a lesson in terms of, look, buying stock isn't difficult. It's as easy as buying something off of Amazon Prime. I've bought stock before online. You don't have to have $1 million. You can buy stock. There's some stock that's $5 a stock. Anybody can do it, right? I mean, this is things I think that our community can learn. You can look on YouTube and learn anything. You can learn how to buy stock on YouTube. That's what I did, right? So it's not rocket science. It doesn't take any kind of mathematician or math whiz. But these are, I think, what I got out of this is we finally realized not just some theoretical statistical analysis in terms of what our dollars really worth. We saw it in action 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, in terms of the economic piece, I probably haven't thought through the implication of what would happen if we almost boycotted something. And yeah, our money does go a long way, and we do have to give some thought on posterity. It's like a center of Black excellence. I know in the U.S. you have probably sites and places that are kind of akin to what I'm trying to say. I know there's nothing of sort up in Canada. Really a center of Black excellence that takes the money and just becomes an incubator to develop talent, preserve more than a museum, but just it's a place of really. It's our Silicon Valley. It's our place of Google. Like Google actually is going to come to Toronto, and they're looking to take over the waterfront because they're making a Google city.
I've heard.
Just a really think tank. We don't have a think tank as such, maybe an Afrocentric think tank in that regard. That I think Wakanda is actually an Afrocentric utopia, Edenic environment where you have past, present, future all working together. And one of the things that was really special to see is Shuri, T'Challa's sister, taking the lead as one who has this mastery of the STEM field, right? And obviously, Killmonger had
well beyond the people like the Elon Musks. I mean, I know it's fictitious, but the Elon Musks of the world and the Microsofts and the Google. I mean, her level of expertise is by their perspective would be completely futuristic, 100 years out from now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And don't we dismiss my man Killmonger. He was at MIT. I'm an engineer, so I can appreciate that. Like MIT, you're one of your top-notch engineering schools in the world. Mm-hmm. And so you had these brilliant mind, obviously one devoted to the demise of a civilization, but one that was for the uplifting. And the king was saying, you know what, you're going to lead. And I wanted to point this out to somebody because I don't think a lot of people caught this. And I think I was talking to you about this, Sean, where here you had an example of a Black young female leading an older white male, and seeing the scene where she's saying, fly the aircraft, do what I say. That is so countercultural. That is something that I hope that we can really zoom in on that as a counter narrative, that it is possible that a woman of her caliber, I'm sure there's women like her who are young, who are bright, who can actually lead, but white older men are afraid that they can't do it or have never seen it done and have someone like their caliber in the position of leader. We've seen Mark Zuckerberg do that. He was a young guy. We see Elon Musk, these younger guys that we have no problem follow their lead. But if we see a young Black woman, would we still have that sense that she could lead? And I think that movie pointed that out. And so going back to the whole thing of taking our money and doing something special with it, if not even boycott, but just looking at, can we create a Black Center of Excellence? Can we create these sort of countercultural images that will, if not even for the culture, at least for our children, to say that they can actually do it?
Yeah, I mean, and in addition to that, are there companies or investments that we can make in existing companies that are doing things that we think are positive? Because at the end of the day, when you look at the most influential tool that you have in your tool shed, intelligence education is definitely up there, but the bottom line is money. The only color anybody cares about is green. And if you have enough green behind you, legislators will write laws for you. Companies will cater to you. And when you decide that you're displeased and you threaten to move your money, or you actually do move your money, they will come and try to win your money back. And that's a position that we historically have no experience with. We don't understand it. We don't recognize it. We've seen it, but we just think that's something that's way out there. That's beyond what we're capable of accomplishing. And the reality of it is that, like I said earlier, we have $1.2 trillion worth of spending power in this country alone. If you include Canada, is probably closer to 1.5 trillion, right? That's a lot of money. And that's a lot of influence, a lot of power. And I think we're just beginning to recognize that, wow, we didn't realize we had this kind of influence until we saw 2 weeks later, this movie is $700 million and growing fast. So, where do you think Marvel, Disney, and Hollywood, where do they go from here? I mean, do they make a follow-up movie, a follow-on movie? Do they make this a franchise? Or do they use this as a character and backstory development movie to pull us back into the Marvel universe with a more rounded view of the Black Panther and his supporting cast?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a comic book aficionado probably more confident to speak on that. I do know the Infinity War that's coming out subsequently, which looks really hot, and I'm looking forward to check that out. And Black Panther's role in it obviously won't be a center piece, but an important role nevertheless. Will they make a franchise out of it? I I don't see why not. I, will it be as big as the first one? I always find like usually the first installment is the one that is the benchmark, and it's very hard to eclipse that benchmark. So I don't know what they could do for an encore, like what could supersede that as much as can they create that sort of buzz again? I don't know. I
It's
don't want to say it's
tough.
like one trick pony, but I mean, I can see this be a franchise, but whether it be as popular as the first installment, yeah, man, that is the case. I don't know what would what would
It's
they
tough.
do?
It's a
Yeah.
tough one to top. I mean, yeah, just before we wrap up here, there's a couple things I wanted to talk about that I found that were interesting historical references. So, two things I noticed. One in the poster where you saw T'Challa sitting in his uniform, in his outfit, minus the helmet, and he's
Mhm.
sitting in this chair with this sort of these arches in the back. And some people may have thought that was a really cool chair. I think others are also aware of the subtle references to the actual Black Panther Party. And there's a picture of Huey Newton, who was one of the leaders of the Black Panther Party movement, um, and he's sitting in a wicker chair that has this round back behind him. He's sitting in exactly the same pose, or T'Challa is sitting in exactly the same pose as he was. Do you think that that may have been part of what attracted some people to the movie, thinking, "Wow, this is going to be cool"? I mean, the Black Panther and then the Black Panther Party, and although the story had nothing at all to do with the Black Panther Party, there were subtle references and subtle hints that would just kind of just reel people in, get their imagination going. Would you agree with that?
Well, I do get thoughts about the throne. I may have to look at that again. Uh, I think it's a utopia that this is a metropolis that is run by us, made by us, run by us, for us. And we had no other body to encroach on our space. In fact, we didn't want anyone to even know that we had the space exist.
They had a hologram that covered it from the sky, so you couldn't even see it. It just looked like a bunch of farmers and sheep herders.
Exactly, exactly, which was part of the bridge from. Ooh,
Sorry, that was just me coughing. I probably
okay, no problem. It's something on my. Yeah, it just you had the bridge from Civil War when they were hiding Winter Soldier, and then obviously T'Challa said, "Hey, you can hide him here. There, no one will ever find him." And they say, "Okay, what do you mean no one will find him?" Then obviously the movie picked up because of the vibranium. I this thought of the sort of the city where not to say there's no crime, but I think this is a healthy respect for life because the tribes, I mean, they pretty much got along with each other, and I think so. That's really key too because you had this sort of oligarchy, different tribes, but they respected. There's leader of leaders, right? T'Challa was the leader of leaders. You had Mama there. I don't know what tribe Mama represented, but Mama was part of the tribal council. So again, really highlighting the women in power. Yeah, I just thought that was just a city that said, man, what would that be like? I guess that maybe could be like Harlem back in the day. People said Harlem and Detroit were these places before integration that money stayed in the city and the city grew and then actually integration actually was one of the precursor of its the way it kind of was a shell of itself because money started to leave the community, the brain knowledge started to leave the community, so you had this brain drain. So you had Wakanda where there was no brain drain. Everyone just stayed in this civilization, just built it up. I think that's something of very much intriguing to me. Uh, that here's a community. What T'Challa said, we will be a part of this global community without losing our natural identity. And so I think there's always this tension. You have people that want to be the Louis Farrakhan's and leave and kind of jettison everyone behind, which I think Killmonger wanted to do. Or you have in this case where you have people said, we're going to be very exclusivist and not really engage. Here was this meeting point of keeping our cultural identity, but know that we're part of a global community. And that is the tension that we have to live with. How do we remain Black, yet recognize that we're still part of a global community? that says that we're more alike than different. I think that's the big teaching point. What everyone I think who were not black watching the movie probably got, that gee, maybe there's a different way of living, and not might is not always right. Clearly, these guys who had the vibranium could have used it and destroyed the world. They said, no, we want to use it to serve the world. How countercultural that is compared to our many of our Western countries who want to use might is right as their policy.
And one of the things that I liked, and to add on to what you just said, is that the people in Wakanda, country, as a place where their future was, where they could flourish, where they could create, where they could innovate, right. to their heart's content. Whereas the general rule of thumb is, if you want to sort of spread your wings and create and innovate and grow, you have to lift your roots up and go to Silicon Valley, lift your roots up and go to New York City or wherever else, right? They saw that they just kept investing and reinvesting, and then investing more, than reinvesting in their own country, in their own community. And by doing that, they were able to leapfrog beyond the rest of humankind from a technological standpoint, for reasons that we were able to solve 50 years ago. Why don't we just start helping them out? Excuse me. One last thing I noticed before we wrap up here was they did also have some historical references. If you picked up on them in the movie, there was a scene where Killmonger had a spear in his hand. It was a long spear, typical warrior spear, and he's getting ready to fight. He looks at the spear and he snaps it over his knee and makes it a shorter spear. It's a shorter handle. And I think most people who would have seen that would have thought, oh, he's just making it a handier tool to be able to use so he can fight, be more dangerous, and it's easier to manage. And I don't know that a lot of people notice that there is history behind shortening a spear to make it a deadly weapon. And that comes from the story of Shaka Zulu, the Zulu tribe, the Zulu nation. Everyone's heard of the Zulus, but not very many people know about who the Zulus are. Shaka was born out of a prophecy that the Zulu witch doctor had, that he was going to bring death and blood and destruction, and he was going to unite nations across the continent. And one of the key parts of his rule when he finally came of age was he was involved in a skirmish, what they called war between tribes, and I think the tribe was called the Ndwedwe tribe. And it was more like breakdancing. You'd break dance and they'd break dance, and whoever had the best performance won the war, and then they all went home. Nobody got killed. Well, Shaka had a different thing in mind, and his was, this is nonsense. This isn't even war. So he got this shorter stick with a longer blade, and he got these shields that were body length. And he developed a tactic where he'd approach the opponent. He hit them with a shield, raise their shield up, and then take this blade and then put it right up into the rib cage, into the heart, and kill them instantly, right? And the entire warfare across the southern part of the African continent changed forever as a result of that. And that's how his tribe, like Genghis Khan and the Huns, swept across the southeastern part of the African continent and grew the Zulu tribe to the point where we've all heard Zulu before, whereas there's probably 1,000 other tribes you've never heard of that have been around just as long. But the history of that spear is, I think, happened with Killmonger, who was the antagonist in the movie, kind of like the Shaka Zulu in history books. And his breaking that spear was almost as if he was establishing himself as that character. I'm not sure a lot of people picked up on that, but I just finished watching the Shaka Zulu A&E series with Henry Sele, who plays Shaka. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. That guy's performance is magnificent. He is Shaka. It's an amazing story.
Well, that piece, and that's a good observation. Like when you're talking about, I was thinking about Ninja Turtles, because you had Leonardo who had the longer blades versus Raphael who had the shorter blades. And yeah, it depends on shorter blades could be just as deadly compared to the longer blade, depending on who's the martial artist using it. So I wouldn't be surprised that had that sort of that imagery behind it. One thing I found that was interesting with Killmonger, that his rage knew no bounds, and that even the killing of his girlfriend was seen as part of the greater good. That because he talked about, he said, "I've killed all my life to kill you," and so even killing his girlfriend was part of that. So the deep setting rage, we can't overlook that there's a lot of young black men who were just angry and just want to get out and want to really topple the system and create some level of even anarchy, because it's better than the bondage that they're experiencing. So Killmonger, yes, he represents the tension between the continental and the diaspora, but he also represents black rage of just angry at the system and don't know how to really channel that knowledge and that experience is something good, especially being fatherless as well. That didn't help either. So his character was very multifaceted, multi-layered, and worth exploring. So he was definitely fascinating. I think the scene when he was in the museum and the woman was just like watching him and said, "You need to be watching what's going into your system than watching me." That was kind of
right. Right.
So those sort of things where he just represents that the black man who is scapegoat, the one who has just burdened with just anger because he just feels like he just doesn't have that direction. And so I thought that was very interesting.
And the way you just described him was a very apt description of Shaka and his story. He was very angry. There was lots of rage. He didn't have his father. The father, basically, in his tribe, the Zulu tribe, they have many wives, and his mother was. He was born from his mother before his father married her, and in that part of the world, that is a no-no. Mm-hmm. So she was outcast, and because she was outcast, she grew up very angry. So a lot of that rage you saw in Killmonger, and that destroy everything. I don't care. I'll scorch the earth. That was completely Shaka. So very interesting parallels, and the way you put it just now just made me think that it was deliberate. They were trying to create a parallel between him using African references in history to build up a character in this movie. So I thought that was a great opportunity to learn something. All right, Denley, anything that you want to add or anything you want to plug before we wrap up here tonight?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for another opportunity to be on your show and share whatever tidbits of knowledge that I have. For those who are starting to follow me, then shout out to you all. I appreciate that. I want to give some thought in terms of bringing some more critical thinking to some of these issues. As much as after the passion has dissipated, it's now thinking through our issues. I hope that to the like of maybe Dr. Dyson, and do more thinking, more of a think tank, and try to throw out more ideas that can help our community, and also bridge the conversation between us and the greater population of understanding our world, as you talked about, in a way that they may not have understood before. So that's some of the things I'd be really thinking through and reflecting on how I can do that. So I don't have a specific project, but there'll be activities, initiatives that would be really focused around those efforts that I can maybe post online.
That'd be great. I'm looking forward to it. And anybody who's watching this who has any comments about any other movies or any other literature that you think would be great for us to see, our children to see, post it here. Anybody who is interested in learning how to investment 101, there are hundreds of YouTube clips that'll teach you the absolute basics, and it costs very little. Anybody can do it. If you can afford to, buy dinner at Chili's for you and your family, you can afford to buy stock. So definitely look at making your money. I mean, one of the things I thought about doing, and I kind of kicked myself for not doing this, because the day got away from me and I'd forgotten about it. On the opening day, I was going to go in and buy some Marvel and Disney stock because I knew it was going to blow up. And I figured at the very least, I get the cost of admission back. The movie would be free. And that's the way investors think. There's one investor, I forget his name now. He's on the Shark Tank. And the guy's a billionaire. And he says, I don't buy coffee at Starbucks. Why would I pay $5 for coffee when I can make it home for 40 cents? I'd rather take the extra money and invest it. He's talking about dollars and pennies, not hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars. And when you think at that scale and you think at the way he's thinking, there are stocks out there that are less than $1. I mean, you're not going to make a huge amount of return, but you learn as you go. You can buy stocks for $10 a stock. There's tons of them out there, right? So I definitely kick myself for not doing that, because it's $700 million today. I guarantee you I would have had my admission paid for. I bought tickets for 4 of the people. I'd have had that covered off, plus dinner, and have some money left over. So food for thought.
Yeah, just quickly, I was talking to a friend of mine who's in the finance industry, and he said, sometimes it's not doing the investing in stocks is not necessary for you. It's for your children. They watch you do that, then they will build on what you've started, and their children will build on. So it's starting the financial legacy and the financial habits. So you may not make a whole lot of money, but they see mommy and daddy in the game. And now they're socialized to say this is just the way of life to do that. Folks, capitalism is not going anywhere anytime soon. It's I wouldn't want to go through a history lesson. It's as long as the empires that exist remain in existence, the system is going to be around. So get used to learn capitalism, get familiar with stock, get familiar with investing. Just to shoo it away and say that's not my thing, you're doing yourself a great disservice. As long as the empires exist, whatever those empires are, they will keep the system in place. If the empires are no longer there, then you can create a new way of accumulating money. But this is the way our world works, at least the Western side of things. So we're better just prepared to equip our children to make the use of it.
Exactly. I mean, and if you're in Canada and you work for an organization and you have what's called a registered retirement savings plan, and they may take some money out of every paycheck and put it in there, that's investing. What they're taking your money and they're investing in mutual funds, which is a combination of stocks. If you're in the US and you're getting what's called, it's basically the same thing. So you may already be doing it and you're not even aware that you're doing it. It's just that someone else is making the decisions on your behalf. So take a couple hundred bucks and do it yourself. If you lose $100, oh well, you're still putting money aside in your 401k or your RSP. So you're learning something that you can make a few dollars for yourself, and you can teach your children how to be self-sufficient and not look for a handout from the Black Panther movie to pay for some charity event that you like to have happen. Your children will develop those funds on their own and pay for it themselves, and we can invest in our own community. All that said, all right, Denley, thanks again for joining me for another fantastic show. Thanks, and thank you again for your insights. I very much appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. All right. We'll do it again sometime again.
Sounds good. If you enjoyed the show and want to see more, follow our Facebook page called The Man Cave by Gentlemen United. Thanks again for joining us in The Man Cave.